You're listening to the Courage Hotline with Candace Doby. We're back with season 3 of the Courage Hotline podcast, y'all. I am excited, and I am your host, speaker, author, and leadership development strategist, Candace Doby. If you have not done so, let's go ahead and get this out of the way. Please go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an upcoming episode. And if you're out there and you love this podcast, please do me a favor and leave a rating or a review. When you do that, you are helping the platform that you are listening to this podcast on know that the content is valuable. And so then they will share it with more people who need to activate their courage at work and in the world. If this is your first time listening, check it out. On this podcast, I serve up candid advice to callers who need help doing hard things in their professional lives. You know, things like giving critical feedback or setting boundaries or speaking up in intimidating spaces. Now, on each episode, I draw upon a decade of research on courage to help the people put their fear in check and their feet in motion. And I do it, y'all, with the same signature blend of truth, love, and shade that captures audiences when I'm speaking on stage. Now, before we get into season 3, I want to share with everybody that I've got a special retreat coming up. It is called the Own Your Brilliance Retreat, and I created it specifically for Black young professional women who are ready to conjure the courage to show up and step up and speak up at work without apprehension or apology. Now, in 2 Power Pack days, participants in this retreat, they learn and leverage my process for managing fear, activating personal courage, and taking risks so they can spend less time and energy censoring or hiding themselves and more time demonstrating their brilliance. Did you hear that finger snap? I meant it. If this sounds like it is for you, then let me say this. Listen up. It is time to stop playing games with your potential. If you are interested in attending or sponsoring a participant, please visit CandaceDoby.com for more information. All right, y'all, I am ready to spill the courage tea, honey. So here we go.
Hi, my name is Tessica, and I have a question in terms of how I should proceed in a situation with my director who has the absolute inaccurate perception of me. In my recent one-on-one with my director, he believes that I was, I think the quote was, cringe-worthy aggressive in my meeting with one of our organization's senior officers. And I gotta be honest with you, the feedback was crushing. I have never been accused of being aggressive, moreover, cringe-worthy aggressive. And it's just really put me in a tough spot in terms of how I should navigate and move forward.
Girl, I was side-eyeing the entire time you were talking, Tessica. I mean, in my head, I'm like, wait, what? And then I had to reach out to one of my besties to get her reaction just to make sure I wasn't overreacting. And she was like,
"Did you say cringe-worthy aggressive?"
Okay, Tessica, first let me say that, you know what? I am really sorry that this happened to you. That someone, and not just someone, okay, but your boss, that's who we're talking about here. Your boss described you as cringe-worthy aggressive. Yes, folks, this is exactly how we want to give feedback so that the people around us will listen and change. That's not how you do it. And Tessica, you mentioned the word microaggression. So it left me guessing as to whether you were a part of a different racial group or gender group or some other group than the person delivering the feedback to you. So for everybody out there listening, we did reach back out to Tessica and we confirmed that she is a Black woman and her manager is a white man. All right, so if you're new to the whole microaggression situation, let's just level set about what it is. Microaggressions are thinly veiled, really everyday instances of racism or sexism or homophobia. And there's so much more, but they're everyday instances that you just see at work and in the world. And sometimes these can be very overt, very clear, very recognizable insults, and at other times they can come across as a passing comment or gesture. So I'm going to get a bit clearer on why I think this was a microaggression a bit later. So we have just gotten into this thing and we've already got a lot to address. So the first thing that I'm going to say as your courage coach in this episode is this. In my work, Tessica, I have learned that most people, they want courage in the workplace for one of three things. And that is, number one, to speak up. They want courage to ask for help or to give critical feedback or to express some kind of different or divergent idea in the room. Number two, they want courage to step up. And that is to step into leadership positions in their organizations, to raise their hand, to take the lead. Because when we do that, when we step into leadership positions, we often have to take credit and responsibility for when things don't go exactly right. And in many cases, that requires us to have courage. And then number three, a lot of professionals want courage to show up authentically without censoring themselves. They want to show up as the fully expressed version of themselves. And this last one, for me and in my work, it often relates to marginalized groups. So people of color, women, members of the LGBTQ plus community. These are the folks who want to show up as the truest, authentic version of themselves. Oftentimes they are afraid that parts of themselves will not be affirmed or accepted. So these are the three, reasons that I see that people want courage for in the workplace. And so we're going to file your question, Tessica, under the courage to speak up. Because from what I can tell from this question, you've got some internal tension going on. It sounds like to me that you are bearing the burden of worry and frustration, and maybe even, I'm going to go as far as to say humiliation as a result of what your boss said. I'm going to put myself in your shoes for a second, and I'm going to say that, you might feel a level of discomfort when you engage with your boss who has made this comment. You may feel like you have to censor yourself or pull back, which now leads to you not being as engaged in your work as you were before. Now, I bet, again, I'm going to step in your shoes for a second, and I am making assumptions, but I'm going to bet that the trust that you have or had for your boss has been impacted as a result of this comment. And where there is no trust, y'all, especially on a team in the workplace, there isn't really the highest level of creativity and contribution and engagement. So your boss doesn't really know this, I'm gathering, or maybe he wouldn't have made the comment, but his comment really is impacting the trust between you two, which in effect is impacting his bottom line. Because I bet that there is a piece of you that as a result of hearing this comment probably said to yourself, you know what, I'm over it. Or maybe you said, you know what, I just don't even care. Or maybe you said, I'm just going to do my job and that's it. Hello to all of the quiet quitters that are listening to this episode right now. Now, let me just make this really clear. I have no doubt, Tessica, that you are doing your job and you are doing it well, and that your level of engagement and satisfaction with your job probably has taken a hit because of this comment. So what this leaves us with, Tessica, is a choice to speak up or not to speak up, to give your boss feedback or to not give your boss feedback. And I'll say this, in all matters of courage, there will absolutely be disruption. I'm not even going to say there might be disruption. There will absolutely be disruption. And that disruption will either be internal, meaning that if you decide not to speak up, you are going to bear the weight of tension and stress and worry from not having your voice be heard. It's almost like you burn yourself up inside as a result of not giving the critical feedback. So that's internal disruption. The other side of disruption is external disruption. And this is when the action, like speaking up, disturbs the comfort zone and it disturbs the ease. However superficial that ease may be, it disturbs it within the dynamic that you have with your boss. So if you say something to him, the external disruption could be that your feedback results in tension. actually, girlfriend, there's going to be tension either way. Okay. Or maybe it results in isolation if your boss feels uncomfortable as a result of hearing whatever feedback you give. So I just want to set the stage, for you, because there is absolutely going to be disruption. So we need to know that. The question is, how do we get to the choice of speaking up? And the answer is we have some evaluation to do. There are 3 components of courage that I like to evaluate when I am working with people and organizations. And the first thing or component that we have to evaluate is the risk. What is the risk? We'll get into that in just a second. The second thing we want to look at is what is the reason that you would ever take the risk to give feedback to your boss? And the third thing we want to look at is what are your resources, your internal resources for persevering through the risk. So as you can see from those 3 things, when it comes down to courage, it really comes down to risk and being able to evaluate the risk appropriately and properly. So we're going to go through this really quickly, okay? But I really do want you to give it more thought at home and for anybody listening who might be going through something similar. So the first thing, again, what is the risk? So we've kind of already talked about this, but here's what you need to know about evaluating the risk. There are at least 2 sides to risk. There is going to be the risk of taking action, which most of us think about first when we think about risk. And then, though, there is going to be the risk of not taking action. So you actually need to understand what you have to lose on both sides of the coin. So this is how we get a fuller picture of risk. Now, let me just clarify this, because often when I'm talking to people, what they want to do is they want to look at what they will lose if they take action. So what they will lose if they speak up. And then what they want to look at is what they will gain if they take action. And I'm here to say that, that's not an apples to apples comparison, which to me makes it the wrong comparison. So we have this little thing in our brain, okay, it's called, it is a cognitive bias. It's called hedonic asymmetry. And it means that the negative will always be more noticeable, more consequential than the positive. So if you are making a comparison between negative and positive inputs or information, it's not always the best comparison because of this cognitive bias that we have. So what we really want to look at is what we might lose if we take action. So if we speak up, and what we might lose if we don't. Okay, so Tessica, what do you have to lose? On one hand, you might lose access to the inner circle or access to key projects if you speak up. That is maybe a real possibility. On the other hand, you might lose some self-esteem or a sense of self-respect. You might lose opportunities to course correct this dynamic with your boss, okay? You might also lose a repetition. So let's think about if maybe we were at the gym and we're doing some reps. So you might lose a repetition to add to your pile of experiences that reinforces the reliability of your skills to do hard things. So all of this can happen if you don't speak up. And that is why we need to consider both sides. The risk of not speaking up or taking action can be long lasting, and it can lead to regret and dissatisfaction with yourself and with your job. So the first thing, what is the risk? The second thing that we need to be able to evaluate before we take courageous action, like speaking up and exposing ourselves to potential isolation and rejection or professional tension, we have to really understand our reason for doing so. And here's a hint, Tessica, hint, hint. It needs to be internal. So just make sure that you are tapping into your internal motivation when you are making this decision. So often what I run into is that we are unsure about whether or not to move forward because we haven't clarified our internally motivated, values aligned reason for doing so. So part of your internal reason, it could be, I want to honor myself. Let's say you have a value of self-respect. Well, then speaking up and having a conversation or delivering critical feedback to your boss would be an act of self-respect and honoring yourself. Now, I'm not going to say that because you have clarified your values, it doesn't necessarily make it less hard, but now what you have is a really strong anchor to stand on to move forward and navigate through any challenge that may come up. So if you don't have a clear, internally motivated, reason for speaking up, now is the time, Tessica, to go and get you one. Lastly, Tessica, you have to have some resources, some internal resources. And I believe that there are two that are critical to courage, and those are competence and confidence. Now, the competency I want you to focus on for your particular question is technical ability or technique. So when we need courage for a verbal action, like giving feedback, so often what we need is a technique or a strategy for what to say and how to say it. And when we have a technique or strategy down, then we can feel more confident about moving forward, because confidence at the end of the day is having faith or trust in your ability. So we need to have faith or trust in your technique or your strategy to have this conversation. So on that note, Tessica, what I want to do is I want to give you a few strategies for technique that you can take right into your boss's office. What we're dealing with here is you, Tessica, addressing your boss's comment that you were cringe-worthy aggressive in a meeting. The first thing that I'm going to say is that this is a judgment. The fact that you were called cringe-worthy aggressive means that your boss made this comment or this judgment by filtering your comments, your expression, your approach in that meeting through his own filter and experience. Which, based on what you've said, you confirm that he's a white man. He could be a middle-aged white man who doesn't really have any friends or anybody in his circle who look different than him. So he's filtered your comments, your expression through his personal filter and through his experiences. I am actually going to venture to say that your boss probably doesn't have a problem with your work. Maybe doesn't even have a problem with your performance, not with your results. It sounds like your boss has a problem with your style, which is why he thinks you are cringe-worthy aggressive, or the way that you presented yourself in the meeting was cringe-worthy aggressive. So his comment actually, what I think, could be communicating, and likely is communicating, his racial bias. Why am I saying that? Well, because there is a long and hurtful history of Black women being characterized as the angry Black woman or the aggressive Black woman stereotype in the workplace and really other parts of American culture. What I want to deal with next is the fact that a relationship between a manager and a direct report, it should be one of trust. And there is some trust that has probably been lost as a result of this comment. This is so good that this question came in, because I just read a headline from CNBC yesterday that said, "We're in a crisis of trust in leadership." So Sandra Sucher, who is a Harvard Business School professor and who studies trust, said in that article that leaders of all kinds are failing some of the basic expectations that people have for how they should be treated. And you can really tell if a leader is more concerned about their people's well-being or the bottom line based on how they communicate. And we have a whole communication crisis going on in this one question. But I can assure you that your manager, who probably thinks of himself as a good manager, wants trust on the team. So we're actually going to lean into that as a strategy for a conversation to have with him. The other thing that I want to mention is in the conversation that you have with your boss where you are delivering critical feedback, my suggestion is to deal with the impact of that feedback and not the intentions. I think so easily we can go into conversations and we want to say to the person we're talking to, I know it wasn't your intention, to say something that was hurtful. Or I know it wasn't your intention to XYZ fill in the blank. For this conversation, you don't necessarily want to talk about intentions. I mean, your boss may want to talk about intentions, but what you want to really deal with is impact. So I just want you to remember that as you are crafting your strategy to deliver this feedback. And then lastly, we are going to lean into empowered flattery. Now, I already know that you are rolling your eyes or thinking, what? Flattery in this situation? Okay, flattery can get a bad rap because it can be equated with sucking up. Flattery, yes, it can be defined as excessive or insincere praise. But you know what, Tessica and everybody else listening, it does not have to be that. Flattery can just be an expression of respect. I will tell you that research shows repeatedly over and over that flattery builds trust. So we're actually going to use flattery from a place of control and power. I actually think flattery is a tool that is often underutilized and underrated. This is a situation where I would say that it would be helpful to appeal to the good in people that they believe about themselves. Okay, you have to be discerning, yes, when you use this tool of flattery so that you can ensure that you are using it from a place of truth and power. So, Tessica, you're going to have a conversation with your boss. How you set that conversation up really should be informed by your boss's style. I gotta say this because I'm an everything DISC certified practitioner, and I believe that understanding and adapting to people's work style is really a great recipe for greater impact. So if your boss is the kind of person who likes to process, he needs time to process. It may be better to set up a meeting in advance, explain the purpose of the meeting, and give your boss time to marinate on the information ahead of time. If your boss is fast-paced and likes to resolve things quickly, then it may be best to shoot a quick text or knock on the door and ask if you can talk. So it really does help. And I can tell you that maybe your boss has not taken time to understand your work style, but you can put yourself in a better position to have greater impact if you can understand his and set up the meeting in a way that adapts to his work style. Okay. So now we're going to get to the conversation. Tessica, I don't actually want you to do a lot of peaches and cream to set this conversation up. I don't want you to do a lot of like setting the table and all of that, shucking and jiving. Like, I'm not here for it. And the reason is because it's not necessary. And the reason it's not necessary is because of a concept called retroactive interference. The name is not important, but the concept is. And what it really holds is that processing critical feedback takes so much energy that the information that was shared immediately before the feedback is delivered, it will not make it into long-term memory. So you've just spent, for people who want to spend 5 minutes setting up a conversation before they get to the critical feedback, guess what? People are likely not going to remember anything that came before the critical feedback because of how much energy it takes to process the feedback itself. So maybe what you do to set this conversation up is you simply just say to your boss, I'd like to share some feedback with you about a comment you made in yesterday's meeting. Are you open to that? Now, I like to ask that question, are you open to that? Because it gets a buy-in immediately. You're getting buy-in from the very beginning. So that's up to you. That's a tactic that I like to use. And then you might say something like, after our meeting yesterday, you told me that my comments were, in your words, cringe-worthy, aggressive. And I want to share with you how hurt I was by that comment, especially from my boss who I respect and trust. But I feel like that trust has been impacted. And Tessica, what you've just done by saying that is you have dealt with impact instead of intentions. You talked about how hurt you were by the comment. And what you also did in that sentence is you used some flattery. I like to say empowered flattery. But you said that you respected and trusted your boss. And so if that is true, you're not sucking up, but you are stating something that is true and that your boss would like to hear. I'm sure that they would like to know that you respect and trust them. So after you say that, you might say something like, there is a long and hurtful history of Black women being characterized and labeled as aggressive in the workplace. And your comment, it fed into that narrative. So right there, you're letting your boss know why his comment was hurtful. And, again, he might want to come back and say that wasn't my intention. But again, we're dealing with impact, not necessarily intention. And it's not really your problem that that wasn't his intention. You were there to communicate the impact of what his comment meant and felt like. And so then you can say something like, I felt it was important for me to share this with you because I know how important trust on this team is to you as a manager and as a person. Again, there's a little bit of flattery, in there. You're putting trust again in front of this manager. And, I think that that's something that would be important to remind him of in this conversation. I think you can position your manager as a decent person because most people really do see themselves as decent, good, and moral. And this may help your boss to communicate the feedback that he was actually trying to give you in a more receptive and respectful way. That is all I have for you, Tessica, and I hope it was a lot, and I hope it was helpful. What we would really love is to hear back from you after you have a conversation with your boss so that you can let us know how it goes. All right, I want to drop a quick piece of courage candy on you. These are the bite-sized insights on courage that you can stick in your pocket or tuck in your purse and pull them out whenever you need a taste of courage motivation. Can I make something clear? If you want to act courageously at work or in the world, if you want to speak up confidently or step up boldly or show up unapologetically as the fully expressed version of yourself, then you need to make one thing crystal clear, and that is your values. What are they? Do you value self-respect or freedom or authenticity or trustworthiness or excellence? What are your values? You want to clarify them so that you can be internally motivated by them to do hard things. Your values are your anchor, and they happen to be the only things that are strong enough to help you navigate through challenges and uncertainty that may arise when you decide to move past go. All right, peeps, that's it for today. If you heard me say something that really resonated with you, please drop me a line in the form of a review. And of course, share this podcast with your friends too. If you have a question that you want addressed on the Courage Hotline, visit couragehotline.com for more information on how to submit your question. Now, if you need more help conjuring your courage than what this episode provides, check out my website, candacedoby.com, to see how we might be able to work together. I'll see you next week for another episode. This podcast is written and recorded by Candace Doby. It is produced by the Can Do Company, and the music was created by Lamara Shirley.